Alrighty, let's get started here. I thought I would start a little bit different today than usual and actually talk a little bit about the gear that I actually shoot with. That's always a very common question that people have. So I thought I would hit these topics first. So first off, when it comes to vacations for me, my vacations are about family now. But I am lucky I have a very tolerant family. My wife being a photographer, she understands that I need some time to get out and shoot. I usually get the mornings and the evenings where I can go out and shoot myself. So I'll usually wake up early and I'll go shoot sunrise. And then if it looks like it's going to be a good sunset, I'll go out and catch a sunset. Most of the time, the stuff in the middle of the day, I'm honestly not that interested in. I'm more of a landscape photographer. And then for myself, I also plan one day trip a month. So I get one day on a weekend every month that I get to go out and shoot. And it just gives you a chance to go out and uh, just kind of exercise that visual muscle and get out there and shoot. So let's actually talk a little bit about gear. This is kind of my bag and the stuff that I carry. I actually pack pretty light compared to most folks. I carry one DSLR. It's a Canon 6D that I switched to, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. I really like this camera because it has built-in GPS and built-in Wi-Fi, and both of those are pretty cool. And it's a full frame chip. And with the built-in GPS, it tracks not just where every picture is taken, but it also tracks the path that you hike on that day. So if I go out for a day or in the morning, it actually records a little file on there you can download and look at it in Lightroom. It actually shows you everywhere you went and where every picture was taken. So it's just kind of a fun tool. And then what I'll do is I'll go in and I'll mark spots as ones I want to go back and shoot later, because if you're a landscape photographer, you go out and the lighting's not good that day, or you want to come back in the fall when the leaves are turned. It kind of gives me a way to remind myself that that's a place I want to go back and shoot again in the future. Then I just carry two lenses. I carry a 17 to 40 and then a 70 to 200. I don't worry about anything in the middle. I can just step forward one step or step back one step and get those areas that I want. And then I do use a tripod for just about everything that I shoot. I use a carbon fiber tripod from Enduro, which I absolutely love. I switched to it, I don't know, probably 6 months ago. It's the best tripod I've ever had. I purposefully went with one that didn't go as tall as I normally do. I'm right at 6 feet tall, so I usually get one that when I set it up and I extend the column, it will be above my head. And that's just from my background shooting medium format in the studio and wanting to have a really robust tripod. But most of the shooting I do today is actually out in the field, so I don't really want to carry all that extra weight. So I got one that when I set it up and put the camera on top, it's just about eye level. It's perfect for me. And it's only about 4 pounds. In terms of filters, I only carry 2 or 3 filters with me anymore. Anything that's a color filter, I can do in the computer. So the only thing I carry is a polarizer, because you can't really fake a polarizer, and it's invaluable for landscapes. Plus, it gives you a nice bit of neutral density as well. And then I also carry a couple neutral densities, including one really heavy. I think it's a 8 or a 9 stop neutral density filter, which allows me to really get very smooth water. Now I pack all of that into a low pro Flipside Sport backpack. I'm a bit of a snob when it comes to backpacks. I've got a long background in backpacking, so I want a backpack that feels like a backpack first. A lot of people just take a camera bag and they put straps on it and they call it a backpack, and to me that doesn't work that way. I want someone who has experience making backpacks, which Low Pro does, and that you can put your camera inside of it. So it's a beautifully designed bag. It has a spot for a water bladder, so I can carry 2 quarts of water in it, and it opens from the back rather than from the front, so that you can actually, while you're wearing it with the waist belt on, you can flip it in front of you and access everything inside of your bag without having to take the bag off. And if you lay it down, you lay it down on the outside, not on the back side, so that when you put it back on your back doesn't get all wet or dirty from laying it down. And it's really valuable to be able to get into your bag while it's still on you. I shoot in the waves and in water a lot, so in those cases, you can't really set your camera bag down. So I want to be able to be, up to my ankles in water, be able to get into my camera bag and get the thing that I want. All right, so before we move on here, any questions on the main camera gear that I carry? I do see one question. Someone's having a problem with their audio. If you're not getting the audio, I would check your speaker volume on your side, except they're probably not going to be able to hear that. So let me just type that in. All right, I do see a couple questions coming in here. Does the tripod fit into the backpack? It doesn't fit into the backpack, but it has this great tripod holder on the side that I use instead. And I think the an ND filter that I use is a oh, what the heck is the brand? I can't remember now. It's not Lee, it's the other one, High Tech. And it was mostly just because when I bought my filter system, all the high tech stuff or the Lee stuff was back ordered. They're pretty much identical. And then because I do have a pretty wide angle lens, that 17 millimeter lens, it does require a ginormous polarizer because the polarizer needs to go on the outside of all of your filters. So it's a 105 millimeter polarizer that mounts on a ring on the outside of the filter holder. You can kind of see that in the picture in the bottom right hand corner. I don't know the model number on the Enduro, unfortunately, but it's the I think it's a 3-section leg one that comes up to about 5 feet when it's opened. One of the questions is, why do I use the 6D over the 5D Mark III? It's actually for the GPS and the Wi-Fi that are built in, which the 5D Mark III doesn't have. And when you look at the picture size, they're pretty much the same. And for me, everything I shoot is a landscape, so I don't really care about the autofocus system. I'm manually focusing everything that I shoot. All right, so let's kind of move on. So this is what I actually carry with me when I'm going out to take take serious pictures, or in the mornings and the evenings when the family lets me. But the rest of the time, I'm carrying my iPhone, and this is my carry it with me all the time camera. And with the iPhone, I also have a set of accessory lenses that I got from PhotoJojo. That's photojojo.com. And there's a lot of different accessory lenses out there, but I really like this set because it clips on magnetically to the camera. It doesn't actually go around it, so you can still keep a case on your phone. There's a telephoto, a wide angle, a fisheye, and an incredible macro. And I carry it with me all the time. I just keep the lenses in my pocket, and it's perfect for capturing textures in skies when you're out. Even though it's the middle of the day and you're not looking for something you're going to do big, you can shoot textures in skies because those are something that even if you have a small picture, they don't really fall apart when they're applied as a texture over another image. Let me just show you real quickly what those lenses are like. So this is what the view from your iPhone is with no lens on it. That's just kind of the normal view. There's the wide angle lens right here, which has some great distortion on the edge, and it widens it about twice as much in terms of the angle of view. It kind of looks like an old lens baby to me. It has that stretchy, fuzzy blur around the edge that I really like. There's a 2x telephoto, which is actually the one I use all the time because it kind of takes the iPhone and puts it to more of a portrait focal length. There's a fisheye, which I personally don't use all that much, but if you like fisheyes, it's a lot of fun. And then there's an insane macro lens. This thing gets down to, I don't know, it's like a quarter of an inch field of view. Imagine like your pinky fingernail. That's how close it gets. So just ultra close macro images. Alrighty, so I think that's enough about gear. Let's actually go in and talk about pictures a little bit. Let me see if there's any other questions here. Will these lenses work on an iPad? I assume they will. I haven't tried it on the iPad, but the little camera port on the iPad and all the iPhones are all pretty much the same size, and they probably work on all the Android phones too. You just go to PhotoJojo and check it out, and they'll have all the information on it. Let's see if we have any other questions before we move on. Let me send everybody a link on PhotoJojo real quick. So in the chat window, I'll put in their website. And I think when you go to their website, you'll have to click on the store button when you get there. And they have just all sorts of great fun photo accessories that you really don't find anywhere else. They're kind of the hipster source for photographic accessories. Alrighty, so let's jump in. I'm working in Lightroom here to keep track of my images today. And let's start off with a very simple one. One of the things I like to do is I try not to overdo my images. I want them to be very natural in their appearance. So I have this image right here that we're going to work on first. This is photographed on the beach after sunset, and it's got a very cool muted color cast. All I want to do is I really just want to correct the color because it's a little too cool and bring a little bit more color back to it. So I'm going to send this off to Perfect Effects. There's a couple different ways you can do that. I'm just going to right click and go to Edit In, and then I'm going to send it to Perfect Effects. Sorry, I'm working on a dual screen system today, so it keeps throwing things up on the wrong screen. All right, so when the image opens up into the suite, and it'll open up into Perfect Effects here. There we go. And once I'm inside of Perfect Effects, there's two things I want to do. I want to lighten up the foreground a little bit because it's this very dark, cool gray, and I really want that sand to look a little bit warmer. Even though I'm in Oregon and this is more what the sand looks like, I want it to look a little bit more tropical in nature. So I want to lighten up the sand. So I'm going to do that by going over here to the Effect Options. This is actually the way Perfect Effects works are by stacking filters, and the filters that are built in are these 11 filters over here in this effect pane. Everything you see on the left are presets that stack multiple filters up to create a look, but they're all driven by these 11 base filters. So if you're a savvy user, you can go in and use any of these 11 filters and adjust them to your heart's content. So I'm going to start off and go to the tone enhancer. The tone enhancer is the one that we use for adjusting the brightness and the contrast of the image. And when it loads, it's going to automatically try to set the contrast range for me by setting the whites and blacks. And on most images, that's a good thing, but on an image like this that is very flat, it's going to make it look too contrasty. So I'm actually going to bring those back down where they were. I am going to use a little bit of the local contrast. This will add just a little bit of pop to the detail. And then we're going to bring up the shadows slider just to, there we go, just to lighten up the sand a little bit. Then now we're going to adjust the color. So I'm going to click the Add button here in the stack. This will add a new effect layer, and we'll go to the color enhancer. Sorry, not the color enhancer. I want to go to the photo filter instead. Here we go. Photo filter. And the photo filter, remember I mentioned the only filters that I really carry for my camera anymore are just polarizers and neutral density. It's because I have things like the photo filter right here where I can actually simulate just about any filter I would have put over my camera lens. In this case, I want to use a graduated warm cool. This is going to let me add warmth to the foreground and cool the sky. Let me show you how to use this. This is one of the most versatile tools in Perfect Effects. When you use a bi-colored filter like this, you have the options of the two colors that you have selected. You can click on these and it'll pop up a little color picker and you can pick which color you want. And you can also swap those colors back and forth. Oops, apparently I've opened up a color picker somewhere. There we go. So I can fine tune those colors if I want. Maybe I want that orange to be just a little bit more of a yellow. There we go. The swap button will flip those. Right now I have orange on the top and cool on the bottom. I actually want it the other way. I want cool on the top and warm on the bottom. So I'll click on the swap button and that'll flip those around. And the next thing we want to do is control the position and the transition of the filter. The easiest way to do that is to come down here to transition and turn it all the way off. This creates a hard edge transition. You can use the vertical, horizontal, and rotation sliders to set the transition where you want. So I need to move it so that the vertical is right about where the horizon line is, right where the sand and the sky meet. Then we'll increase the transition to soften it. There we go. And then the last thing I want to do is come down to mode. I don't want to change the mode of the filter. The clean shadows option is going to be what you would normally get through if you were to put a colored filter over your camera lens. I'm actually going to pick a different one called subtle. This is something you couldn't do through the camera. This is a little bit more subtle interpretation. There we go. And then with the strength sliders, I can control the strength of each color. So I can make it stronger blue at the top and subtle, more subtle in the orange at the bottom if I want to, by moving these guys back and forth. So I'm going to go for a pretty strong blue. And I'm going to go a little less on the orange. And then the base saturation is a really important one. This is actually sets the saturation before the filter is applied. So if I bring this all the way to the left, you can see it creates a very muted, almost a black and white look. I want to increase it up a little bit instead, just to increase the overall underlying saturation. There we go, just like that. Let's go ahead and show you before and after. So there's before, that's out of the camera. And then after, just by doing a fairly modest correction here inside of Perfect Effects by lightening the foreground and then increasing the saturation and adding a blue tint to the top and a warm tint to the bottom. There we go. When I'm ready, I just hit apply and it'll save those results and it'll send them back to Lightroom. While it's doing that, let me go over here to the questions and see if there's any questions I can answer. So there's a question about, do I use a variable ND filter? I don't use variable ND. I have used them in the past. I don't really have anything against them. It just happened to not be the way that I went. I think it's probably a fine choice. I have heard some issues if you use them at a really heavy setting, that sometimes they can create some moire patterns or do things you may not like. I've personally never seen that, so I couldn't say. There was another question about the loop that I use for my camera. It is a, oh my gosh, I can't think of the brand. It attaches with a magnet. It's made in Hungary, I think. I think it's called an LCD VF. I really like it because it has a huge eye relief, which basically means the distance from your eye can be from it. You don't have to squish your head right into it to see, and it's got a very big optic, a very bright optic on it, so it does a great job. Let's see. Do I use any HDR-like effects? I do use HDR. I don't use it as an effect. I actually use it to, merge multiple images together to expand my tonal range from time to time. And that's actually one of the other things I really love about the 6D is it has a great auto bracketing mode in it. So you can go in and you can set it to say, I shoot a 7-stop bracket. I can go in and I can put it in manual, say I want a 7-stop bracket, and then I can assign that to one of the custom functions on the dial. So whenever I want to shoot HDR, all I do is I just turn my camera dial to that little custom function. It automatically sets everything up for HDR. Basically, I just set my exposure and focus, hit the button, and it shoots the 7-stop bracket for me all in one step. So you don't have to constantly turn that HDR bracketing on or off. You can just assign it to a mode. Makes it very easy for doing that. Let's see. So there's a question about where I got the color picker from. Let's just come back here. I'm going to open this image back in Perfect Effects, and I'll show you where I got that. I was in the photo filter effect, and anytime you see a little color square, that's an indication that you can set the color of the action. And when you click on that, you'll get a little operating system style color picker like this one. And if you're on the Mac, it's actually a wonderful color picker that's built in. You can work in RGB colors, which most photographers are comfortable with. I actually work with HSB mostly, so I can easy to control. It separates the saturation and the brightness from the color. And if there's colors that you like to use all the time, you can drag and drop them down into this little color well at the bottom so that you can always access your favorite colors quickly. Let's see if we have other things in here that we need to answer before we move on. So there was a question about why did I do this in Perfect Effects instead of Lightroom. I probably could have done something fairly similar to this in Lightroom as well. I just happen to be very comfortable with working in the Perfect Photo Suite. I know where all the controls are, and I know how to get the results that I'm interested in there. And let's do one more question, and then we'll move on to our next image. Where did it go? There was a question about, do I keep in mind what I'm going to do in the computer when I shoot? So basically pre-visualization. And I try to. It's not 100%. If I'm shooting an image and I know that the sky, for example, isn't going to be interesting, I'll kind of know that I'm going to replace that sky later. Or if there's a really obvious distraction and I can't find an angle to get around the distraction, I'll know that, yeah, I'm going to remove that distraction later. But on a shot like this, I probably just looked at the raw file that I got back and said, ooh, I could probably use a little bit of work. All right, so let's jump on to our next image here. The next one we're going to do is a little bit different. I want to show you how to create kind of a a pseudo art project. We want to take an image. This happens to be of the streets in Paris, and we want to go into it and make it look a little bit more like a painting. We want to turn it into more of a piece of art. So we're going to use Perfect Effects for this one as well. I just select the image. Again, I'm going to send it to Perfect Effects. Oops, decided to come up over on the other screen here. All right, so here's the original shot out of the camera, and I want to make it look a little bit more like a painting. So I'm going to show you a technique for doing this, and I'm also going to save this as a preset, and we'll put it on our Facebook page, and you guys can download it later today to give you something to play with. So the first step in making it look more like a painting is to kind of reduce some of the detail that you get when you take a photograph. We want to make it look a little bit more painterly. And I'm going to do that by adding a blur. So I'm going to go to the blur filter. And I don't want to use just a regular blur that's going to turn everything to mush. I want to use a type of blur called surface blur. And when I select surface blur, let me zoom in a little bit here so you guys can take a closer look at what this does. It smooths out the small details, but maintains the sharp edges and the detail of the big edges. Let me turn it on and off so you can kind of see what this does. So there's the original, and there it is after a little bit of surface blur. So just in that single step, it's got us a good start at making it look a little bit more painterly. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to twist the color palette of the image. To make it look more like a painting, we want the colors to be a little less accurate. So I'm going to add another effect layer, and I want to add one of the presets called pastel. So I'm just going to use the little search field up here at the top, and I can start to type in until I see pastel colors. There it is. We'll add pastel colors. So pastel colors makes it look a little bit more like a watercolor or a pastel. It's going to lighten it up a little bit. It's going to desaturate some of the colors, except you notice that the reds have become a very vivid pink, and the greens have become very vivid as well. So that gives it a bit more of a painterly color palette. The next step, we'll add another effect to it, and now we're really going to set the overall color palette for it. There's a bunch of different filters you could use for this. Most of them live down in the vintage filter. So I'm going to go down here to vintage. We'll use the quick view browser. Oops, maybe we won't use the quick view browser today. My dual screen doesn't want to get along with it. I am going to make this a little bit larger here. And you could use just about any color filter you want to set the overall color palette. I'm going to go down to the bottom, and I'm going to use Vintage Warm in this case. There we go. You can control how strong it is by using the amount slider. So if you don't want it quite full strength, you can adjust that. There we go. Let's add another filter. And now we're going to add a texture to it. There's a texture I really like called Earth. So we'll just use the search field. We'll type in Earth. There we go. We'll add Earth on top. This gives it a cool old world look. Let's add another layer. Now we want to add some cracks to it so it looks a little bit more tattered. So I'm going to use the search field. I'm going to type in tattered, and this brings up the tattered paper textures. I'm going to use the gray option. There we go. You can see this adds some little cracks and lines into it, making it look more old-fashioned. And then we're going to finish this up by adding a border around it. I want to make it look like it was on torn paper. So we'll go to the texture categories, and let's go to paper, and we'll just scroll down in here. You know, I think it's actually in the antique category, not in the paper category. And we want to go to borders anyway. Borders, antique. Of course, you could always just use the search field and type it in too. There we go. Cool. So let's take a look at the before and after on this. There's the original, and there's the after. So it kind of takes a normal photo and makes it look more like a old world antique painting. Now, I mentioned that this one right in the middle, which I have Vintage Warm on right now, is the one that really sets the color palette for the image. You can go in and change this to any of the filters that change the color and then add everything else back on top. So for example, if I wanted this to be a cooler rendition instead of a warmer rendition, I could just click back in my stack to vintage warm. Let's go down to the vintage category, and maybe we'll pick a different one. We want something that's a bit more cool, like, let's find one that we think is cool. Maybe this one in here, Katie. We can add that. Again, control its strength, and then just click back on the top of the stack, and it'll add the textures and the border right back on top. There we go. So you can customize that to any look that you'd like. All right, let me check the questions here before we move on and see if there's anything I can answer for folks. Yes, we'll also put the preset onto Google Plus for folks who aren't Facebook users. This shot was actually, I think, in Paris, not in Italy, but they do have kind of a similar look to them as well. On the blur choice, let's go back down to the blur step. The one that you want to use to create that painterly look is called surface blur. So under blur type, there's Gaussian, which is kind of like the normal soft blur, a radial blur, which will look like a zoom, or surface blur. And surface blur is the one that's going to smooth out the fine detail, but maintain the crisp edges in it. Question about, is there any order that you add filters? And I'm actually going to ask you to respond back to that. And do you mean filters in the software or filters on the camera? Or maybe I'll just answer both questions for you. When I'm shooting, when I put filters on, I always put the neutral density filter goes in first, then the polarizer goes on the outside. You always want the polarizer on the outside. It'll reduce moire patterns or some odd things that will happen. If you have the polarizer on the inside with a neutral density on the outside, you can get some odd things to happen. When it comes to the computer, when you're adding filters in something like Perfect Effects, the order is really up to you. It just depends. The best way to think about it is each step that you add becomes the beginning of the next filter that you add. So changing the order that you put things on will definitely change the way things look. I tend to do any of the tonal corrections first, then the color corrections or color changes, then you'll do special effects like glows, then you would do any textures and borders last, and then if you're going to do sharpening for output's the last thing you would do. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to turn that stack back up to the top so we can see the final results. Question about shooting in RAW and sharpening. I alternate most of the time. If I'm shooting for myself out in the field, I do shoot RAW, and the reason I do that is I like to have the extra bits. Basically, when you shoot RAW, you have greater information so that when you start to make big color or tonal changes, you're not going to introduce what we call posterization. If you look at an image, the shadows and the highlights are actually made up of very little information digitally. And as you start to open up those shadows, the shadows aren't going to look good on an 8-bit JPEG image. Where with the RAW, you have the ability to have it's a quantum leap more levels in those shadows and highlights. So it makes it easier to make big color and tonal adjustments without losing any detail in it. Then I typically save everything as a PSD. PSD is a great format. It's layered. It saves all the masks. I can read it in Photoshop. I can read it through the Perfect Photo Suite. And I work on a Mac, so pretty much anything on the Mac will read it as well, at least the composite version of it. Alrighty, let's jump in and do another image here. Next one, we're actually going to combine two images together. I'm going to start with this image shot in the sand dunes. You notice that right here along the top edge, I've got some white clouds right along the edge of the sand, and it doesn't lend itself to a great deal of contrast. I really want to have greater contrast between the sky and the sand dunes. So I'm going to stick a different sky into this image. First thing I want to do is I need to open this image into Perfect Layers. So I'm just going to select the image and we'll send it up to Perfect Layers. I'm going to the Plugin Extras menu and selecting Perfect Layers. Oops. Doggone it. Come here. There we go. When my image opens up in perfect layers, first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of some of these little dust spots that we don't want in the scene. And I'm going to use the retouch brush to do that. The retouch brush, all I have to do is just dab it over things that I want to remove, and it'll automatically sample the neighborhood and fill it in with similar texture. So it's just kind of a great little tool for cleaning up some of these annoying little spots. Now for the corners, you'll notice I actually vignetted just a little bit. This can happen if your lens is really wide and your filters don't have the covering power of it. And occasionally this will happen with an old set that I had. So I have a little bit of darkness in the corner. Rather than cropping those off and losing that information and changing my composition, I can just use the clone brush option of the retouch tool. The clone brush allows me to sample the area that I want to fill it in with. So I'm going to sample right here by holding down the Alt key on Windows or the Option key on the Mac. Select right there, and then I can paste that information over the corner to smooth it out. Always make sure you have a bit of feather when you do this as well. All right, let's do the same thing down here in the bottom corner. I'm just going to sample right here in the sand and then paste that in. So there we go. So now we've cleaned up that corner. The next step is I need to go back to Lightroom and find a new sky to put on this image. Now, there's a bunch of skies that come in the extras folder in the suite. So I could come over here to extras and go to backgrounds and skies and use one of the ones that we provide in the suite. But I actually have one that I shot with my iPhone as I was driving down the road that I kind of liked for it instead. So if we go back to Lightroom, here's this iPhone shot of a more dramatic sky. I can send that to perfect layers as a new layer on top of that image. So I'm just going to select it. We'll do the same thing we did before. We're going to send this to perfect layers by going to the file and plug in extras menu. It will send that to perfect layers, and it'll ask me, do I want to create a new image or do I want to merge this in as a new layer? I want to merge it in. So I'll hit the merge button. This will add that image as a new layer. Now you'll notice it's smaller. The iPhone obviously takes smaller pictures than my big camera does, but it's a sky, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm just going to use the transform tool. I'm just going to move this sky and make it larger until it covers up my scene. I want to make sure the horizons are about the same spot. There we go. And then I'm going to put this sky underneath the sand dune. So I'm just going to drag it in the layer stack so it's below. And then we'll go up to the top where the sand dunes are at. And I just want to get rid of this sky. And I can do that really effectively right inside of perfect layers using the masking brush and just make sure that the perfect brush option is on. And now all I do is I just paint right along here, and you'll see how it paints away the blue sky and it stops automatically at the sand dunes for me. So I'm just going to paint right along here. You'll see how the old sky goes away and the new sky is appearing underneath it. I'm going to turn the perfect brush off and make it a little bit bigger here, and we'll just paint away the rest of this sky. There we go. I always like to check my work by turning on the grayscale mask. This will let me see any flaws in my mask. You'll notice there's several little flaws in here that I need to clean up. There we go. Right there. Let's turn the perfect brush back on and clean up that little spot that I missed right in there. Well, it doesn't want to go away. We'll use a regular brush. There we go. Let's go back to all layers. So now I've blended in that new sky. I can move the sky underneath it to position it exactly where I want it. So you see I can move it around and I can pick just the content of the sky that I want in there. Now I want to have a bit of blue in my sky, maybe just about like that. Now, the other cool thing is because my sky and the sand dunes are on two separate layers, I can handle them completely separately. My goal is to actually make this a black and white image, and I'm going to send this to black and white. And I can work on the sky and add a different black and white look than I do on the foreground. So let me show you what I mean. Let's actually work on the sky first. So that's the layer that's selected. That's the layer that we'll work on when we go to perfect black and white. one of the cool things about the Perfect Photo Suite is when you work with the multi-layered file, you'll still see all of the layers that you're working on, even though you're only affecting the one layer. So you notice I still see the sand dunes in color, and I can see the sky, the layer I'm actually working on, behind it through the transparency. So I can now adjust it on its own. So the first thing we want to do to this sky is we want to make it a bit darker. I'm going to use a red filter that will take the uh, blue in the sky and make it darker. And we're probably going to make this a little darker overall just by adjusting the blacks and the whites to increase the contrast in that sky a bit. There we go. Now, because this was shot on an iPhone, and the iPhone is inherently kind of a small, noisy sensor, the sky is actually pretty grungy. If we zoom in here just a little bit, you'll notice that the sky is pretty noisy. And we don't really want that noise in our scene. But the nice thing about a sky is it doesn't have to be sharp either. And a good way to smooth that sky out here inside of black and white, and it adds kind of a cool look, is to use the glow option. So we'll come down to glow. I'm going to turn the glow on. There we go. I'm going to make sure I use a light glow like screen. And then we'll just turn up the amount of glow. And that'll help smooth that out. And if it lightens it a little more than we want, we can just use the brightness slider to darken it back down a little bit. And that'll smooth out the texture in the sky and add a little bit of a glow to it. Now I'm going to hit apply, and then we'll go back and we'll handle the sand dunes as a separate conversion. That way we can get them set both the way we want. While that's applying, let me check the questions here. Lots of questions out here. All right, so the way that I sent the image to perfect black and white, let me see, make sure I go back and do these in the proper order of people's questions here. All right, so I'm going to start here at how can you adjust the opacity to facilitate aligning layers? So what you can do is, let me just turn this black and white one off for a minute, and we'll turn the color one back on. On either layer, you can reduce its opacity and then use the transform tool to align things. And in some cases, where you have strong horizons in both the sky and the foreground that you're trying to replace the sky in, it's important that the horizons get kind of in the same spot, or the perspective of the sky won't look realistic. It's amazing how discerning your eye can be to something like that. The best way to do that is to just take whatever your upper layer is, in this case the sand dunes, bring the opacity down to about 50%. That'll let you see the horizon of the sand dunes and the horizon of your sky, and then you can manipulate those just by using the transform tool to get those horizons lined up roughly in the same area, like that. Now on an image like this, because I'm looking kind of up the sand dunes, it's less noticeable. I think the next question was, how did I actually send that sky layer to perfect black and white? All I did is I made sure that the sky layer was the one that was selected, and then I just click in the module selector right here on black and white, and that will send the whole image to perfect black and white. Let's just do it again here. I'll click on black and white, and that'll open it up so all I see is the sky in black and white, but the foreground remains in color because it's on its own layer. We're going to actually go in and we're going to turn the foreground black and white as well here in just a minute. But the nice thing about that is it puts them on separate layers, so I can really adjust both of them separately. All right, let's jump back here to layers. And I'm going to turn my sky on that I was using. We'll go to the sand layer, and now we'll send this one to perfect black and white, and we'll convert the sand to black and white as well. There we go. All right, for sand, I want to increase the detail. The detail is really going to bring up these, I'm not sure what the proper term is, these little rivers, these little veins that you see in the sand. When it blows, it builds these little ridges. And those ridges are really interesting photographically. So I want to use the detail slider and turn that up so that I really start to see those ridges appear. Now, the sand is also supposed to be pretty bright. And what's happened is it's turned darker because when I open up Perfect Black and White, it's automatically trying to set the levels for me. It wants to set the black and the white. And like I said, on most images, that's a good thing. You want to do that. But on something like this, where there really is no pure blacks or pure whites in the image, it's actually best to turn those off and reset those back down and work with them manually instead. There we go. So now the sand looks a little bit more sandy. I'm going to increase the contrast just a little bit. And then I want my sand to be brighter. So the easy way to lighten the sand is to pick the color that we're working with. So the sand is mostly yellow. So we'll go down to the color response pane. We'll grab the yellow slider and I'll just increase it up, and that'll increase just the yellow brightness in the scene. There we go. Just like that. That's all I would do. Let's hit apply and we'll send that back. So by separating the sky from the foreground, you can manipulate the two separately. Even if it was the same image, even if I wasn't replacing the sky, you could use the same technique just by making a copy of the image. So you have two layers that are exactly the same, and you just remove the sky on one of them. And this gives you the ability to work with what you, if you're familiar in the Photoshop parlance, with a selection. It allows you to work in small portions of the image by using layers and masks. All right, let me check over here on our questions. I know I'm going a little fast here. I apologize for that. Keep in mind, these is recorded, so you can always come back and watch it later and catch any of the little things that I missed here. See, I see a slight edge on the right edge between the sky and the sand. Easy way to clean that up, and I should have done this before I did the work, was with the when I use the masking brush and I have it set to the perfect brush mode, just increase the feather amount a little bit. I was going a little fast and being a little cavalier this morning for a webinar, but if I was doing this for final work, you'd want to zoom into 100% and check everything when you do that initial masking. So I would just increase that feather up, and that will feather and soften this edge a little bit more. In this case, you don't really see it once it's turned to black and white either. We will be at Photoshop World in Vegas. I personally won't be there, but the rest of the onOne team will be there. There's a question about cover how I would prepare one of my images for a gallery. I assume that's gallery wrap. Yes, gallery wrap. We'll do that on the last image. I'll kind of show you how to get something ready for a gallery wrap. And there's a question about reducing noise in a color image. There's a lot of different tools out there. onOne doesn't make a specific tool for noise reduction. I use Lightroom. Lightroom has a brilliant noise reduction tool built into it. It's probably the best one that I've seen out there. All right, let's jump in. We'll do one more image. I'll show you how to gallery wrap it, and then I think we'll be out of time. Let's go back to Lightroom here, and we're going to grab this image of a fall creek here. I'm going to start by sending this to layers. All right. I sent it to layers actually just to do a little bit of dust spotting. I have this annoying little hair on my sensor this day that I didn't notice that I need to get rid of. So I'm just going to use the retouch brush. I could probably do this with the retouch tools in Lightroom as well, but not everybody has Lightroom or Aperture. So I'm just going to paint over that, and voila, that one will go away. While I'm here, I might look for anything else that is a light trap that's a distraction. There's a little leaf right there that's a distraction. And I think this one green one right here kind of bugs me as well. I'm going to use the clone stamp tool to kind of get rid of this guy here just by cloning a little bit of this leaves from over here on top of it. There we go. Not perfect, but just enough to hide some of the major distractions before we get to work. There we go. Now let's send this one off to effects. All right. So on an image like this with moving water, one of the things I like to do first is to actually remove the color from the water. To me, water is clear. It should be white. It shouldn't be blue. It looks like a tidy bowl toilet when you do that. So I want to remove the color from the water. there's tools built in called Purify for doing that. There's one for purifying the whites, one for purifying the shadows. The Purify Highlights is also awesome for wedding dresses too. I'll use it for that. So I'm going to grab Purify Highlights. We'll add that, and you see how it just sucks the color out of the highlights, out of the water. The one thing you want to keep an eye on is just to turn the preview on and off and see if there's any other little highlight areas that are getting picked up. In this case, it's affecting a little bit of the trees and a couple of these leaves. So the easy thing to do is just grab your masking brush and just paint those areas out really fast. So I'm just going to make sure that only the water area is really getting affected by that. There we go. So we've cleaned up the water. Let's add a layer. Next thing we want to do is tweak the color a little bit. And one of the most powerful tools for doing that is actually the color enhancer inside of Perfect Effects. It allows you to affect each color range in the image differently. So for example, I want to take the oranges and I want to brighten and increase the color in the oranges. So I go to the color range pop-up and I select orange. And now I can use the saturation slider to increase how vivid just the oranges are in the image. It doesn't affect the saturation anywhere else in the image, just that orange color range. I can also lighten the oranges by using the lightness slider as well. So that really makes those orange fall leaves pop out a lot more. At the same time, I can grab a different color range, maybe the greens. I want to take the greens and I actually still want to increase their color a little bit, but I want to darken the greens to make those greens a little bit more subtle and push them back a bit. We could even tweak the greens to be just a slightly more blue or slightly more cyan, like that. There we go. I'm just going to toggle that on and off, and you'll see that's a fairly subtle adjustment, but it makes a big difference in the image. All right, let's go ahead and add another layer. Now, if I was doing a fairly straight image, I would be done now. I really wouldn't do anything else to it, but I want to add a little bit of a glow to it. I'm going to use one that I really like called Deep Forest. It's kind of this dark, rich glow. We'll add Deep Forest. It's way too strong at its default setting. I'm going to back this way down to only about 25 or 30. I'm going to turn just that one effect on and off so you can see what it does. It just adds just a little bit of a dark, mysterious glow. And then I think the last thing to do on this is just to add a vignette. So let's go down to our vignettes. I want to add a dark vignette to it. And I'm going to use the one at the top called Big Softy. There we go. Now that's pretty strong as well. So I'm going to back that vignette off to only be about 30 or 40. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to brush the vignette away from this bottom right-hand corner. I kind of want the water to be able to flow and escape out of the image. So I'm just going to use the masking brush. Let's make it really big here. And I'm just going to paint that vignette away off the bottom right-hand corner. So it's darkening all the other edges, but not the water in this corner. So it kind of has a spot to escape from. There we go. Let's look at before and after. There's before, and there's after, just like that. All right, let me take a look at the questions here, and then I'll show you guys how to gallery wrap this guy. So there was a question on Purify. The easiest way to find Purify is just to type it into the search field, and you can find it. Some questions about using the masking tools in Mask. I don't have time to do that today, but we do have a lot of recorded webinars and training on how to use Perfect Mask, and we'll do more Perfect Mask webinars in the future as well. All right, I'm going to apply this, and then I'm going to show you how to prepare it for a gallery wrap. Let's just hit the apply button. These will apply those settings, send it back to Perfect Layers. There we go. Notice I have a new layer with the results on top of it in Perfect Layers, and the bottom layer, the original layer, is turned off. but I can always get rid of that top layer and go back to the original if I want to, or if I decide that, gosh, maybe my results were a little too heavy-handed, I can always just use the opacity slider now to change the overall strength of the image. All right, now to prepare it for gallery wrap, I'm just going to go to perfect resize. Doesn't matter which layer I have selected with perfect resize because it's going to crop and resize every layer in the image, not just the selected one. Let me click through the getting started dialogues here. I start with the presets. I actually made these presets so I know exactly what I want. I print on an Epson printer on Epson Canvas. So I'm going to go to the Epson Canvas category. And let's say I want to make a 24 by 30 out of this. So I'll go down to the 24 by 30 gallery wrap preset and I click on it. This will set everything for me automatically. It will crop the image, it'll turn gallery wrap on, it'll set the right settings in gallery wrap, it picks the right resolution and the right amount of sharpening for that type of printer and output media. Now, if I want to adjust the crop, all I do is I just click on the crop tool. This will turn gallery wrap off, and you'll see how I have the crop box. It picks the middle of the scene for me automatically. Now, keep in mind the original shot is a different aspect ratio than a 24 by 30, so it's going to have to crop something to do it. But I can now move the crop box around to pick the area that I want to crop. If I don't want just a dead center crop, I want to move it over so that I can get this rock in my scene in so that this little interest point is right on a third line and this rock is kind of on a third line. So something more like that. There we go. Then we'll just turn gallery wrap back on, and that will show me the final crop with the gallery wrap wings on it. Now you can change the thickness of the wings. 2 inches is what I use, and that's really what pretty much everybody needs if you're using a thick bar to wrap on, but I do change the type. There's 4 different types of ways of adding these wings, and it depends on the image as to which one you want to use. On an image like this, where there's detail but it's not super descript, using the reflect option works fine. There's also a reflect soft option, which does the same thing, but it blurs the edge a little bit. Or the stretch. And I use the stretch if I'm working with people and they have an appendage going near the edge, because you don't want to have this crazy, strange, repeated stretched arm on the other side of the canvas. So in those cases, I'll use the stretch or the stretch soft option instead. That just takes the edge and stretches it out. So a lot of times that stretch soft is the way to go. Just like that. You can also add a color overlay on top of this. So if I wanted to darken those wings a little bit, I could just turn the opacity of the overlay up a little bit and it will darken that edge as well. Just like that. That's all you have to do. Alrighty, let me check the questions here. Question on sharpening. I should do the sharpening in Perfect Effects or in Photoshop or in Lightroom? It really kind of depends. There's 2 different cases when you use sharpening. There's output sharpening, which should be done at the size of the print that you're planning on printing it at. So I do all of my output sharpening in Perfect Resize because that's where I prepare my image to be printed. And I like to do it here because I have a lot of control over it as well. If I roll down this sharpening pane, it has our progressive sharpening, which is a great sharpening method that nobody else has. It's one of our deep pieces of technology. It can actually sharpen the small details more than the large hard edges so that it preserves the hard edges without creating a halo. And I can prevent it from affecting the highlights and the shadows. So especially if I'm working with film that I've scanned, I can make sure I'm not sharpening the film grain in the highlights or the shadows. Now that's if you're doing it for final output. There's also more of kind of a preparatory or an artistic sharpening that you would do if the original image was actually out of focus. That's kind of the difference. There's the output sharpening. You're sharpening the image to compensate for loss of sharpness that's going to happen when you print it, because every printer has dot gain and the image will lose a little bit of sharpness in the process of printing. The kind of the preparatory sharpening that you do before is if the original image wasn't sharp out of the camera, and that you can apply. I would still apply it fairly late in the process. I wouldn't apply it before I did everything, but that's what you would use to bring back areas that weren't as sharp as you would like. And when I do that, I typically do it in Perfect Effects because I have the brush tools where I can control exactly where the sharpness goes. Because at that point, it's more of an artistic sharpening. I want to have control over where it goes. I want to make sure it doesn't get on skin or doesn't get on the sky. I just want to sharpen the details of the image instead. Let's see what else we have here. Question is, can you mirror on some side or reflect on some sides and stretch on others? No, unfortunately, it uses the same technique on all four sides. It'll either stretch or reflect. Question about, is it planned to have a function like smart filters? So actually, all of our plugins except for Perfect Resize that you use through Photoshop, you can use as a smart filter if you're a Photoshop user. Getting the ability to go back and adjust the settings after the fact through Lightroom or Aperture or on the suite as a standalone, it doesn't do it today, is what I can tell you. That doesn't mean it will be that way forever. Alrighty. I think that's it. We are short on time, and I'm not seeing any more questions come in. Thank you guys for attending today. Again, the session is recorded. You can always check it out in our archive webinar section. Alrighty. I thank everybody for coming. Have a great day. Bye-bye.